The stars need to be aligned for you to read this and not be emotionally and mentally scarred. I should not be reading anything more disturbing than this because I think it will kill me. It kind of goes from 0 to 60 really fast. I think it's incredibly f***ed up. Hell is other people. I can't say I recommend these. Hi, I'm Sam. There's quite literally no one asking me to do this, but I would like to tell you about the 5 most disturbing books I have ever read. When I was originally putting this list together, I was planning to include a lot more books, but then I instead opted to only include 5 because I feel that these 5 are ones that actually really disturbed me and really stuck with me. The other ones that I wanted to include on this list are ones that I think could be considered disturbing, but didn't necessarily disturb me as much as they may other people. So I have ranked these where number 1 is the book that is the most disturbing book I have ever read to date. So number 5 is Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. I think this is on a lot of disturbing books lists, and for good reason. This is the most violent book I've ever read. It is unflinchingly brutal, and I think it really has to be. I've talked before about how this takes place in the 1850s on the Texas-Mexico border. So I think that there was a possibility that Cormac McCarthy could have really romanticized this era, and I think a lot of sort of like old-timey American cowboy stories are very romanticized. But at the end of the day, the reality is more likely that a lot of white men in the 1850s were murdering, raping, pillaging Native Indigenous folks. In this book, we're following a group of, honestly like a gang of men who are either in it for money or just like f***ing insane and want to kill people. But yeah, these men are conscripted to hunt down Native Americans. It's like a contest, basically. The more scalps they can bring to the person that's hired them, the more money they'll make. There are really graphic depictions of basically everything under the sun. I think the reason this book impacted me so much is because of how violent it was without letting up. It was unrelenting violence. But if you've ever read Cormac McCarthy, you know he's obviously a very good writer. So yeah, I think if you can handle the crazy content, this is at the end of the day a very good book that I really enjoyed. Next is The Pillowman by Martin McDonagh. This is about a writer who is arrested in a totalitarian state because some of his short stories are eerily similar to a string of child murders that have been happening. This one is very interesting, unlike anything I've ever read before. One of those where after I read it, I was like, how does anyone write like this? This contains stories within stories. There are so many layers of brutality. We have the brutality of the totalitarian state. We have the brutality of the real life murders that are happening to these children. We have the brutality of the stories that our main character, who is an author, has written. So this is incredibly layered. There are parts where it's almost darkly funny, but then it very quickly pulls the rug out from under you, and it's like, oh shit just got real. This is obviously very short. This is a play. You could definitely read this in one sitting. I think this is one that would really benefit from multiple reads because I think it's one of those where I would appreciate it more and more the more I read it and sort of be able to pick out more each time I read it. This is outrageous, brutal. It gets under your skin, and I found it to be really effectively disturbing. Number 3 is Tampa by Alyssa Nutting. If you're familiar with this book, you know that the reason it is so disturbing is because of its graphic depictions of sexual relations with a minor. And specifically, this book is from the point of view of the adult woman who is the aggressor. And she became a teacher for the express purpose of preying on young boys. So I think what makes this especially disturbing is we're from her point of view. So it's really graphic and there's really no restraint. But Alyssa Nutting, I think, is such a gifted writer that it's not like some extreme horror where it really is just kind of trying to like shock you. There is sort of this absurd thread throughout the entire story where some of the disturbing scenes are almost funny and kind of almost like toe that line, tapping into that like, I don't know whether I should be laughing or crying right now. This is just like so fucked up. I think listening to this on audiobook is like even more disturbing. I don't know, there's something different about like hearing it versus reading it on a page. So take that information and use it as you will. And then the last little nugget of why I think this is really disturbing is that after reading this, I learned that this story is based on a real life case of a real life teacher, I think in Florida. So yeah, it's just fucked up. People are fucked up. Hell is other people, you know? So if you can read it, I love this book. I think it's really fucking crazy and disturbing, but take care of yourselves. This is not for the faint of heart. Number 2 is the play Blasted by Sarah Kane. This is difficult to explain because I really don't want to spoil anything. I think going into this as blind as possible is ideal. Obviously, look up content warnings though, because this is number 2 on the list of most disturbing books I've ever read. But I will say, this opens with a couple in a hotel room. It's a very expensive hotel room in Leeds. So in this couple, we have a man who is like a terrible person. He's just like spewing all of this vitriol, hateful, homophobic, racist, etc. stuff, while trying to coerce this younger woman into having sex with him in this hotel room. As this couple spends more time in this hotel room, the environment around them starts to really degrade and go into disrepair. This play is providing a lot of social commentary on the effects of war and sexual violence. It kind of goes from 0 to 60 really fast. So this is another very quick read. If you've read any other Sarah Kane plays, you know that her work is overall quite disturbing, but Blasted is my favorite play of hers. I think it's incredibly fucked up, but it's really good. And then the number 1 most disturbing book I've ever read. I honestly don't think this could possibly be unseated. I think if I read something that's more disturbing than this, it will like actually mess me up. So I hope I never read anything more disturbing than this. This really was like, I could kind of feel that this book was pushing up against like the ceiling of my upper limits. Yeah, I should not be reading anything more disturbing than this because I think it will kill me. So that is Garden by Osamu Furuya. This is actually an Italian version. There is not a physical English version available, but this left such an impact on me that I needed to own a physical copy, even though I do not read or speak Italian. That should indicate to you how much I liked this, despite its disturbing content. This is a short story manga collection, and what's really kind of fascinating is that I wouldn't even say all of these stories are necessarily horror. Really, it's the last story. The last story in this collection is just 50 Shades of fucked up. It will never leave me. It is now like an inextricable part of who I am, for better or worse. So I think for the most part, I'll focus on that last story. That's not to say that the stories preceding that are walks in the park that you could share with your young children. They are still quite graphic, very much adult only. The last one is about a young girl who has never left home. She has basically been imprisoned in her home, and now she's probably like 14 or 15, and she is walking through this forest with this sack that looks kind of bloody, and she stumbles upon this man who has kidnapped, sexually abused, tortured, and dismembered a group of kindergartners. So this man worked for a school and he was taking these kids on a field trip, and instead he brought them to this forest to do all of these awful things to them. And she just happens to stumble upon what he has done, and this leads him to start attacking her as well. So there are like 20 pages of Emmy trying to stave off and get away from this insane fucking man. And then things start to get really weird, like very surreal, and I don't really want to say much more than that because it takes such a bizarre turn. I think it was so bizarre and weird and somehow good. Make sure you are in like tip-top shape mentally. You've eaten a good meal, but it wasn't like too recent. You make sure you're not dehydrated. Like, the stars need to be aligned for you to read this and not be emotionally and mentally scarred. Okay? I am not recommending any of the books on this list, but especially not this one. I think what is so powerful about this is that I love the way that Osamu Furuya sets up a panel. I think it really adds to the disturbing nature of the content. Especially in the last one, it really adds to the sense of the chaos of what's happening. I also was reading about the original publication of this book, and I guess when this book was originally published, there were certain pages that were sealed shut. So the reader would have to physically cut them open if they wanted to read them, because the publishers considered them too violent. So they wanted to really give the reader a choice of whether they wanted to subject themselves to such violence. And Usamuru Furuya said that he was fine with that choice because he wanted readers to have the option to stop reading if they got too nauseous. So, I love you, Usamuru Furuya, but you're not okay. Alright, we made it. Those are the 5 most disturbing books I've ever read. I can't say I recommend these, but if you are a disturbing media connoisseur and you have not read any of these, then I would maybe recommend them. If you do happen to like weird and disturbing literature, I also have a video series ongoing where I recommend weird and disturbing literary fiction books. So I'll link the playlist with those videos down below if you are interested in watching those as well. Otherwise, you can like this video if you want. You could comment. I would love to hear what the most disturbing book you have ever read is, because I'm always looking to read more disturbing stuff. You could subscribe if you wanted. Would love to have you. Love you guys very much. And I'll see you in whatever video I make next. Bye.